Joining me this week are DC Delegate Eleanor Holmes Norton of the District of Columbia, Carrie Lukas of the Independent Women's Forum, Hilary Rosen, Democratic strategist, and Rina Shah, head of Republican Women for Biden. Starting with you, Eleanor, there has been incredible early voting just before this past week. There were almost 70 million more than 60 million mail-in ballots and early voters. I myself voted early in Virginia. How are poll analysts and poll takers recording this, and what does it mean for the election on Tuesday the 3rd?
Well, I think this early voting increases enthusiasm for the Democratic ticket all the way up and down the ballot, beginning with Trump and going all the way to the Senate and the House. We're even going to increase in the House. Now, the early voting takes place in a number of different ways. I have I've early voted, and there's a box here in the District of Columbia that you can just put it in. But Trump is forcing, by his rhetoric, many of his people to vote on election day. So we can't put our cards on the table yet, but that's going to make it very difficult for him because he's cast such aspersion on mail-in voting.
All right, but Carrie Lukas, I've actually seen a Pew poll from a year or so ago saying that, first of all, exit polling is very unreliable because people are, they can't get a fix on how many from each party, from each demographic they're interviewing. So they really don't know from exit polls, which is what we rely on, how the voting really was last election. And because of President Trump saying don't vote by mail, what do you think all that is going to, what effect that's going to have on the election?
Yeah, I think this is one of those years where, more than ever, it's important to be real humble about what we know and what we don't know. There's so much, you get so much information. You can find something to support almost anything out there in terms of whatever your preferences and whatever you're hoping. You can find evidence to back it up. Yeah, there's a lot of polls that look very like a slam dunk for Biden. But I remember that that 4 years ago, it sure looked that way for Hillary Clinton. And so we just don't know. I think that the real question on early voting is not, I think that the problem is going to be, or the question is going to be, how this almost functions as administratively. Obviously there is legitimate concerns about votes being lost or misplaced, or how it's going to be counted, how they're going to be reconciled. And that's not, that's not a, I feel like a lot of times, anytime you say anything about the bad about the potential of voting remotely, that it comes across as if you're a wild conspiracy theorist. But we all know the United States has a lot of monitoring of elections around the world. And we're very suspicious when you have voting that goes on for months, and if it's putting it in a box that can then be tampered with, there's a lot of potential problems. So I worry about how the outcome is going to be, or what kind of questions there's going to be left at the end. So I think no matter how this goes, one way or the other, we should hope for a clear-cut winner rather than having this become a big knockdown, drag out in the courts. I think that would be really hard on the country.
Rina, I've spoken with GOTV, Get Out the Vote, people around the country, and both parties are much more focused on getting out the vote. The Republicans usually don't have to focus that much because their white, non-college educated demographic, for some reason, tends to vote more reliably than the Democratic demographic does. And pollsters this year supposedly have taken that into account because of the horrendously wrong predictions they made in 2016. Your thoughts?
Well, certainly the pollsters I've spoken to on both sides of the aisle are saying so much has changed about polling since 2016. I'm a frequent visitor of the 538 website and then wake up every morning and tune in there. And they have some excellent analysis as well as some infographics for those who are interested to really tell what is different this year and why, perhaps despite the pandemic and all of the chaos it's caused in voting, that pollsters do generally have different methods and have a different sense this year. Also, let's not make a small thing of the fact that Biden is really polling so much differently than Hillary Clinton did, and he's well outside the margin of error in many states. And this is not something that people were expecting at this point in the game, but it's come up and it's been a steady lead. He's grown that lead, and I think that really says something about this campaign. And what it tells us mostly is that this is going to be a close race. Based on the polling I've seen of the past few days, it is going to be a close race. But I'm going to most agree with Carrie there. We need a really definitive victory for one candidate or the other on election night, because we know that the further this goes along, as it gets prolonged, the higher chance it is for both sides to really do something frankly nefarious or something that makes the minds of American voters feel that there's something nefarious happening.
Hillary, are Democrats worried that with all the so-called voter suppression they're claiming is going on with telling people not to vote, getting calls saying they'll check your felony record if you tell them who you are and give them your personal information? Do Democrats fear that's going to hurt Democrats more than Republicans?
Look, I think it's consistently clear and factual that it is Republicans trying to prevent people from voting and not Democrats in this election. That's just indisputable. And, I think it's important just to separate for viewers the kinds of early voting we're talking about. There's early voting in person where you're actually going in districts to voting machines and your votes get counted right away and will be part of the tally. And then there's vote by mail, which has become more problematic because these states are so under-resourced right now. And that's the vote that the Republicans keep going to court to try and prevent from being counted, even though Donald Trump has consistently pulled resources away from the post office for the last year and a half anticipating this. And mail delivery is taking longer and longer in many states across the country. So
way longer.
States, when you look at it, are critical. Pennsylvania is the key one where the Trump administration is saying, no, we're going to court. You cannot count all of the ballots. And so I think we have to be very vigilant on election night on whether or not the mail-in ballots are being counted in these key states. And if they're not being counted, Democrats are going to have to fight for those to be counted, because when they are, I'm confident Joe Biden wins. But this, constant game that Republicans have played is so familiar to 2000 about, if you say bad things enough, you put it in the vernacular. And we're having this conversation about voting. We're not having a conversation about the issues and about the candidates. And that's what's taken over the country this week.
If I can just jump in, because I think that this is such an absolute smearing of Republicans. The idea that it's somehow just a Republican plot to say that I'm a little worried about the Republicans about the post office. I mean, when you put something in the mail that you actually care about, that is important, most people do not trust the post office because it has a tremendous fault rate. You've already found ballots that have been thrown away, military ballots and some Trump ballots that were thrown into the trash. So this isn't just, it's just fairly galling. And I know I'm on a panel with 4 Biden supporters against me, so I'm an unpopular person on this panel. But I think it's just very ridiculous to say that it's one-sided, that all the problems are just Republicans.
Carrie, wait a minute. I'm not a Biden supporter. I'm officially neutral.
Okay,
sorry.
Okay, so
But
here's
anyway, go ahead.
But Trump supporters consistently talk about this as a smear campaign. It's just factual that it's Republicans trying to stop voting. And there's just it's not even worth having this conversation for much longer about this.
I want to switch now to women voters and women candidates. Eleanor, I read an interview with the head of the women's study group at Rutgers, and they are saying that more women of color are running for congressional office than there are women in the U.S. House. Now, my question is, are most of those women running for so-called junk seats, did they get those kind of nominations, or did they get nominations where they really, for the majority, where they can really win?
Bonnie, more women are running from each party. And yes, Republican women have awakened because their numbers have dwindled to very few in the House of Representatives, and they have awakened to the fact that they should vote. But Democratic women are voting to expand the numbers that we won in 2018 when we took over the House, so that I expect that the boon in women voting will benefit Democrats more than Republicans, because the seats that are out there to be taken over are Republican seats, and those are seats in which Democratic women are doing well and are going to help us expand the House.
Do you think there will be but it's a huge margin. There are what, 147 women in the U.S. House. I don't know how many of them are of color, but I would imagine a substantial amount. And there's something like 180 something women of color running for Congress. How many of them are going to make it? How many got the nomination in the way that the district tilts politically?
That's an extraordinary number of women of color to be running for Congress. And I think that part of that has to do with Trump. Part of it has to do with the success that Democrats had in taking over the House in 2018, encouraging women to step up. The numbers tell us that women feel invigorated in part by the changes they've seen in the country under Trump, and Democratic women think that that means it's time for them to step forward.
Do Republican women want to take back the Republican Party as they had it up until about the late 80s as a party of at least mixed opinion on women's rights like abortion?
Well, first we should acknowledge the facts here, and this year started out really well. A record-breaking 227 Republican women filed to run for the House of Reps this cycle, and that the previous record was, I think, 133 in 2010. And so the Center for American Women in Politics, they keep some really good numbers. I encourage folks to go check them out there. But really, this is no small thing. This is actually very much progress for the Republican Party, and it should be attributed to Congresswoman Elise Stefanik of New York. She made some great efforts turning her leadership political action committee into something she called EPAC, which was really for women, to help women get out of primaries. That was the #1 problem we saw with Republican women, and we've talked about on this show many, many times. Now nearly 100 of those women that filed won their primaries, Republican primaries, and they've become their party's nominee. So that doubled the previous record of female Republican candidates in a general election. This is really big for the party. I do think a lot of those have been energized by President Trump, the feeling that, he really stands with them and their community, and also feeling that he's an outsider politically, and that if he could run and win, and they could too. So I'd heard that in these past few years. What I'm hearing now this year in my conversations with Republican women who are switching their vote from Trump in 2016 to Biden this year is that they are really concerned about the direction of the country for two reasons: economy, because of the pandemic. Prior to the pandemic, I was not having these conversations, so I don't have any data to share there, but largely in rural communities, like my home state of West Virginia, where I've convened some salon conversations, I hear it over and over, is that it is the economy to them. It is a feeling that what is going to happen nationally, and how is this country going to recover from the hit that we've taken from the pandemic. Mind you, there are a lot of people right now out there with zero in their bank account, and the Senate just left and did nothing for the American people. I believe the American people needed more money, and this Congress failed us. So what I really think is that these women woke up and said, it's the Republicans who are failing me. It's not just the president, it's those in Congress as well. But I can tell you right now, we will see a lot of people who voted for Trump that are Republican women vote for Biden this time around. And I don't think that's a bad thing. It's country over party.
Hillary, you follow the numbers closely. Do you have any idea how many Republican women are running for the House? And they got their nominations at a time when Trump was still popular. Now they may be running away from him.
Well, I think that the point that Congresswoman Norton raised before is the right point, which is that the map is expanding for House Democrats. And so, you know, look, but I'm somebody who was glad that there are a lot of Republican women running. I want to see more Republican women in elective office. So, you know, more power to them. I think what we have seen, though, overall in the campaign this year is really instructive. In 2016, nationally, there was an 11-point gender gap, which is, everybody here knows, is the difference between how many more women as a percentage voting for a certain candidate than men. So Hillary Clinton got an 11-point gender gap in 16, and that averaged out across the states. This year, we are seeing amazing numbers. And that points to Rina's issue, which is Republican women are crossing over. In Nevada, we have 18-point gender gap. In Iowa, there's a 19-point gender gap. In there's a 17-point gender gap. In Pennsylvania, it's 25 points. So women are going to change the election this year for all sorts of reasons. And I think that Democrats are going to be the significant beneficiaries of it. We've never seen gender gap numbers like we're seeing this year.
Your thoughts, Carrie?
Well, you know, we'll see. Again, I think that all these polls, we have to see who it is, because I also think there's a lot of Republican women out there. You know, it's interesting because I think that we talk a lot about this idea of all the Republicans who end up crossing over to vote for Biden. But in polls that I look at, you usually see when they shake out of what share of Republicans are voting for Trump. You know, it's usually close to around 90. And when you look, and 10% are going to Biden, or roughly. And then if you look at what share of self-proclaimed Democrats are going to Trump, it's usually about 1 in 10 too. So there's an awful lot of Democrats out there who have actually decided that Trump speaks for them, that they are tired of things like the kind of the turning away, or the quietness with which Democrats are just turn a blind eye to violence. And our state is calling for defunding the police and ignoring, you know, the problems that people are having in cities where a lot of people are being affected. And that's one of the reasons why you have seen some polls that suggest that the president may do much better among minorities and in some urban populations. Again, I would just be cautious. You know, and one thing I think is an considered possibility is this idea of who's talking to pollsters. If you are a Republican and you are used to being online and knowing that you need to, you know, if you say anything that even hints at the idea that you might be a Trump supporter or a Republican, that you might lose your job or be socially shamed, which is certainly how it is in a lot of the social media world. You know, am I going to talk to a pollster? I've never had a pollster call and ask me about my vote. You know, I don't know if I'd answer them. I don't know if there's a lot of women who decide I'm going to keep my mouth shut. So again, you know, I think everyone is speaking with a lot of confidence about what we know from the polls, and maybe everybody on this panel will turn out to be right, and that Biden is going to win this in a walk, and that all these Republican women who voted for him in 2016, who we didn't know were going to be there, that they're going to vote for Biden this time. But you know, maybe not. Maybe we are missing the big story, and it's just the media who refuses to acknowledge the existence of conservative women. It refuses to acknowledge the existence of Democratic women who support the president over Joe Biden. You'll never see anybody along those. There's never a woman who will come and be cast as a Democrat supporting Trump that would be given a platform on a show like this, because that's not a voice that the media will acknowledge.
I mean,
even Trump recognizes he is losing women. Why else would he be crying, suburban women, where are you? Vote for me. That's one of his
Like
now.
He also is probably being a little tongue-in-cheek.
He's saying housewives. He's saying housewives. He understands that it is women who are going to give this vote to Biden, and he's screaming out for them in ways that will not, in fact, attract them to vote for him, because he knows that they are much more than the margin of error, that they are leaving him in droves, and he cannot win, particularly if suburban women continue to climb out of those swing states that took him over last time.
There's one other point. I think Eleanor is right, but to the point that Carrie made about it's important to distinguish between voters and who we're voting for. So what we saw in 16, in fact, we saw it in 12 as well. But what we saw in 2016 was, Republicans have staunchly stayed with Donald Trump, including Republican women. And I don't think that's going to change this year either. I don't think there's going to be, despite a huge amount of Republican crossover in women for Trump. But increasingly over the last two cycles, women have identified less by party. They identify more as independents. And what we saw in 16 was that those independents and Republican leaning women all broke for Trump. And I think that's the key difference here, is that we're not saying that Republican women are going to vote for Biden. I think what we're saying is that the huge amount of unidentified voters right now are breaking for Biden, and that the gender gap between men and women is significant. White women elected Donald Trump in many ways, and to my everlasting shame. Black women, have been consistently supporting Democrats. But right. I think
I wanted to get to that, Hilary, because Trump did win white women and white married women in 2016. But they say a lot of young people have already voted, 18 to 25 or 18 to 29 have already voted, and they're coming out for the first time, and they're voting in droves for Democrats. Is that accurate? Because, we heard it with Obama, both elections, and he didn't really move the needle, as they say, very much. He got like 1 or 2% more of young people who historically don't go to the polls out than had been out before.
Yeah, that's what we're seeing, is that younger white women are shifting to Biden, and that the seniors are still with Trump, and in most of the key battleground states. But what we also know is that if you can shift the numbers between 35 and under, and let's call 35 and under younger women now, because of the combined demographic, that can make the margin. And so I think that's what we're going to end up seeing when you have these gender gap numbers. They're coming from somewhere, and it is from younger women.
This was the part that I worried about between 2016 and 2018, is Republican women in my demographic being really turned off by the president's behavior. A lot of us are, moms and moms to young children, and every time the president is on the television, it's gotten to the point where I turn it off, because he's just barking, he's angry, he's using words that I've heard him bleeped before, language I would never expect an American president to use, whether they be a Republican or a Democrat. And this is a turnoff. So I do think a lot of them became unaffiliated and independent ahead of those midterms. And I think it will be so interesting to see who actually showed up at the polls, who actually voted this time. And yes, I think it will be American women who deliver this victory for Joe Biden if he is successful. But look, there's so much more out there that we're not talking about for American women, particularly Republican women. Their embrace of Trump. I mean, look at 4 of the 9 Republican female senators are now fighting for their lives in Iowa, Maine, Arizona, Georgia. These were not places where Republican women expected to have problems, but coming down the pike, you see it, and you see it very clearly. The president is the problem. So I look forward to the day that the Republican Party will move forward without him, and we can get back to a discussion of the ideas, solutions, because right now he's dominating it with his ugly, divisive rhetoric.
Well, Trump is trailing by double digits with women, period. That's going to be very hard to overcome on November the 3rd. And then there's this unknown factor in this race, and that is Harris as the first woman to be a vice presidential nominee. We don't know how that will figure.
First woman of color.
Well, for women, well, yes, for women of color,
Right.
but and also because of Biden's age, she stands a very good chance to become president of the United States.
So you think that is drawing more women of color to the polls than even in 2018?
No, I think it's drawing women of color to the polls in droves. But remember, women of color are the ones who come to the polls for Democrats anyway. I think it is having an effect on women. A woman as vice presidential candidate, it hasn't been that way for a long time. We had a woman as presidential candidate that didn't seem to get her over, although she won the majority of the vote. But it does seem to me that that is a factor in the enthusiasm of women. This double digit for women for Biden over Trump.
Carrie, how do one thing I do have a hard time understanding, I'm not an evangelical Christian. I don't live in that community. I know some people who do. And I know how one mom of 4 children has told me why she votes for President Trump, given what Rina brought up about the way he speaks, the fact that he's foul-mouthed by anybody's estimation. He's used some 4-letter words in public. He is not a great speaker. He uses nasty adjectives all the time. I mean, and Republican women are by and large conservative, and a lot of them churchgoers. How do they
It's
vote
about
for
policies.
somebody
You can, I think that it's interesting that we basically haven't talked for 1 minute about anything, any reason to support Joe Biden other than the idea that Trump is such a terrible guy. And when it comes to something like the economy, you had before COVID hit, the best economy, especially for women in modern history. You've seen, and that is not an accident. That's because the president has lowered taxes, reduced regulations, even something, it's interesting to me that Joe Biden is supposed to be this foreign policy expert, or this, that Trump was supposed to be horrible in this, but something you haven't heard mentioned, I feel like it was a total show of just the absolute and utter bias of the presidential debates, that the topic of the Middle East essentially did not come up. And this is the president has ushered in just the most incredible progress in terms of Arab states recognizing and normalizing relations with Israel. 4 years ago, when under President Obama, we were regularly witnessing ISIS behead people.
You still haven't told me how you reconcile being a Christian woman who does not like the type of behavior Donald Trump has now been.
Because of these policies.
An appeals court just approved a lawsuit against him by a woman who said he raped her in a warehouse or something like that many years ago. You're talking about the media misbehaving. If this were a normal presidency, I have been around for 66 years. I have never seen a presidency like this. So you're not discussing why the media are acting the way they are. You can't call this a normal presidency. And you're not telling me why Christian women feel it's okay to vote for a guy who's raped women, who's assaulted women, who has called women nasty names on national TV. There's no better way to prove how the foul language that he uses than to watch one of his deranged speeches where he goes on and on like somebody out of a mental institution for 45 minutes off topic.
Bonnie, in Carrie's defense, she is telling you why. She's saying that she cares about the policy more than the behavior of the person. And
yeah, thank you,
that's
Hilary.
Right, but okay, so you care about, so the behavior of the person doesn't matter to you. So,
This is Bonnie. I find it astonishing that we're having this conversation and you're saying this as if Bill Clinton was not president. this is the exact conversation that we had during the Clinton administration, and when when a lot of women said, I don't care who he sexually harasses as long as he protects abortion rights, right? That is like a practice. I don't remember if that's the exact quote, but that is how everyone justified the Lewinsky thing and all of the sexual. We now would call, I think everybody basically agrees that Bill Clinton was a predator against a lot of women. And so, yes, it is appalling that we have a lot of men, including Joe Biden, who has been credibly accused of rape. And Marina's right that this is often a choice between two evils. But it's just like the idea that if it's just a personality contest, then yeah, you're right. It can be a really tough call. And I am a mother of 5. And I do have to say, I would never want my kids to talk to each other or to insult people the way that the president does. But I feel like that when I watch television almost always. I'm horrified by the dialogue now. But frankly, this isn't a personality contest. This is about, you have right now, Joe Biden is not saying he will not pack the court. So literally throwing out the rules of how we have conducted the United States of America for the last 150 years. He's contemplating, will not answer, he will not deign to answer a question on whether or not he's going to just toss out and add 4 or 6 Supreme Court justices. He has said he's hinted at being for the Green New Deal. This is an economy crushing platform.
But also, Donald Trump is throwing out 110 environmental regulations. I mean, this is something that people.
Bonnie, let's just not pretend the next time, though, that you're not on the side of Joe Biden, okay? This is not a panel of 4 versus 1. But that's fine.
Excuse me, Carrie. And with a 6-3 majority on the court now, you absolutely know that the Republicans who are supposed to be not apolitical, the Republicans on the Supreme Court are going to change the rules of many things involving civil rights, women's rights, when they get the proper cases. But I do want to get to one thing before we close, which is Susan Collins in Maine, Republican, running obviously a very difficult uphill race, and she voted against Amy Coney Barrett. I can just imagine the conversations in Mitch McConnell's office that they were having, like, well, we're safe, we have the 52 votes, so I can allow you to go against this one because you're about to get crushed. Is she going to get crushed? Congresswoman Norton.
If anybody can survive, she can survive, but I think this is her last term in the Senate. I think Trump is going to bring her down. It's one thing to go with or at least not to be seen on the Senate nominee, on the nominee for the Supreme Court. It's another thing to stand, as her votes show she has stood with Trump. She has been the most anti-Trump Republican, but I do not believe she can survive what is going to be a sweep of Democrats across swing states, including Maine.
Okay, I want each of you. Go ahead, Hilary, your thoughts on Susan Collins in closing.
Well, I think you have running against Susan Collins, the former Speaker of the House and a very popular candidate from the other side of the state. So I think she's probably not had as formidable a challenger as she has right now. Look, I don't think that Mitch McConnell and her colleagues in the Senate have done any favors for Susan Collins. And I say this with a little bit of ambivalence. As a lesbian, she's, cast some deciding votes as a lone Republican on behalf of gay rights. And so I'm disappointed that it's come to this. But, when she cast that vote against that, she cast that vote for repeal of the Affordable Care Act, and then, said, well, I have a commitment from the Republicans that we really are going to fix this, and then did nothing to get it fixed. When she pretended that Brett Kavanaugh was not anti-choice, I think her walking this fine line, that time, I think, has come to an end.
Rina, your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm just so disappointed in Senator Collins. I mean, she's somebody I've really looked to for many years and thought to be very reasonable and perhaps even a model for the future of the party for younger women like myself with views that are a little bit more mixed than traditional Republican women. But I will say I think her time has come. I mean, she's played too many political games. she hasn't played them probably as wisely as Mitch McConnell, and that's probably what's going to lead to her demise. I think she's going out on a very low note where she could have gone out on a high note before, and it's a shame, but good riddance. Don't let the door hit you on the way out.
All right, and last to you, Carrie. I can't imagine you're sorry to see her go because she's one of a dying breed, a moderate Republican in the Senate, as opposed to.
Oh, I'd be very sad to see her go. I think she made a tremendous mistake in not voting to confirm Amy Coney Barrett, because it would have been a reason for a lot of her base to get out there. And Amy Coney Barrett ended up being very popular. That people recognized her as a very reasonable, kind of civil woman, a model for how we wish more politicians behaved. So I think that was a mistake, but I hope she pulls it out. I don't know enough about Maine polling to know if she has a chance or not. That's not my area, but we'll see. I hope she makes it.
Well, the media are saying that if she doesn't, her half Indian American rival, who's extremely popular, as Hilary Rosen just said, will be a star if she makes it in the Democratic Party. So we'll keep watching. Whatever your position is, please get out there and vote before or on Tuesday, November 3rd. Voting is incredibly important in this election. Thank you all for joining me. That's it for this edition. Please visit our website, pbs.org/tothecontrary. Follow us on Instagram and Twitter. And whether your thoughts are in agreement or to the contrary, please join us next time.